Hi everyone, today I'll cover an overview of long-term maintenance program structures and recommended practices. So I want to preface the conversation by touching on the importance of this topic and how post-construction compliance is one of the most challenging MCMs for MS4s. I'm sure everyone's aware of the 2022 National MS4 Needs Survey, but I want to briefly discuss some of the findings and highlight areas that pose the greatest challenges. So survey responses indicated that municipal governments nationwide spend an estimated $23 to $40 billion annually on stormwater programs and infrastructure investments, and only 32% of those respondents stated that they didn't need funding beyond the existing budget. Additionally, it was identified that aging infrastructure, a lack of funding or availability of capital, and workforce and staffing needs are the top challenges for stormwater programs. And limited funding is consistently cited as a challenge for stormwater programs throughout the nation. Respondents were also asked about their information and technical resource needs related to the MCMs and other aspects of permit compliance. And they ranked the highest need being funding and financing, and then asset management, and then the third highest was for green infrastructure and innovative SEMs. So the last data point that I want to highlight is when MS4s had to rank their information and resource needs associated with MCMs, that post-construction scored the highest. So now that we've established that most MS4s are struggling with post-construction, I want to talk about some of the more detailed issues and challenges surrounding MCM5. So I want to start by briefly defining what post-construction controls are and then go over the MCM5 permit requirements. So the major requirements of MCM5 can be broken down into 9 distinct sections. Also, it's important to note that these requirements apply to new development and redevelopment projects that disturb greater than 1 acre, or projects smaller than 1 acre if they're part of a larger common plan of development or sale, and all projects that discharge into the MS4. The Kentucky MS4 General Permit defines post-construction stormwater management in the following way. Post-construction stormwater management refers to the activities that take place after construction occurs and includes structural and non-structural controls to obtain permanent stormwater management over the life of a property's use. The permit goes on to provide a little more context on those activities and controls, and from the language that we see here, we can clearly see that the primary objective of implementing post-construction BMPs is to protect water quality. However, historically, quantity control has often taken priority, and we'll discuss that later on as we review some of the data from the annual reports and the curated sources. For now, I just want to continue examining the permit requirements around post-construction management. So item 1A just requires the establishment of an ordinance or regulatory mechanism to address post-construction stormwater runoff. And the mechanism ensures that any new development or redevelopment incorporates proper stormwater controls from the design stage through the long-term operation and maintenance. 1B just delves into the local post-construction requirements and the inclusion of a water quality treatment standard. You all are intimately familiar with these details, so I'm not going to go into depth. So I'll just move on to the next point. 1C just discusses enhanced runoff control standards for discharge to high-quality waters and alternatives when the projects can't meet that water quality treatment standard. So you have like off-site mitigation or payment in lieu that's available. So 2 is just an evaluation of municipal policies to identify any regulatory or policy barriers to installing green infrastructure. So 3 just details the project review process and enforcement procedures. So dealing with site plan review and approval and post-construction verification. So at this point, we can begin to talk about how some of the MS4s are dealing with MCM5 requirements. And from our 2022 annual report review, we saw that 39% of MS4s actually use a standardized form for plan review, but 41% didn't specify whether they use forms or not, and then 18% explicitly do not use forms. And all of this just highlights the need for more uniform practices or the adoption of standardized procedures. So the column graph that you see on the screen just shows plan review counts and highlights varying levels of plan review activity across MS4s of different sizes, denoted by population ranks. And the graph shows a high number of plan reviews in certain ranks and low to zero plan reviews in others. So now we're going to shift back to the permit and talk about long-term maintenance requirements. This is one of the most important aspects of a successful post-construction program, and this section just requires that permittees ensure that BMP owners establish and enter into long-term maintenance practices. Alternatively, other enforceable mechanisms may be established to make sure that the long-term maintenance of both structural and non-structural BMPs occurs. So from a review of the 2022 annual report, we looked at the adoption of long-term maintenance agreements among MS4s. And fortunately, a majority of the MS4s, 70%, require long-term maintenance agreements. And these agreements are critical for maintaining the functionality and compliance of stormwater infrastructure over time. However, 22% of MS4s don't require agreements, and a very small portion didn't actually specify. So going back to the permit, requirement number 5 deals with BMP inspection procedures, and it requires that the permittee establish and implement written procedures for inspecting a representative number of installed BMPs annually, with the overall goal being that the program should complete an inspection of all BMPs within the permit cycle. Now, alternatively, the permittee can shift that to the BMP owners to perform self-inspections, provided that there's some oversight by the permittee. When we looked at the inspection frequency for post-construction BMPs, it varied quite a bit. 18% of the communities inspected 100% of their BMPs, 25% inspected at least half, and then 32% reported having no post-construction BMPs, which is concerning, but 15% did not respond, and lower percentage of communities inspected less than 75% of their BMPs, with 8% not conducting any inspections at all. So looking at this in a different way, the bar chart that you see displays the total number of post-construction BMPs with the number of inspected within the last permit year across various MS4 population ranks. The average number of BMPs across the ranks is 56, with an average inspection count of 33. And combining the insights from both graphs, it's evident that while some MS4s are highly proactive in inspecting and maintaining their post-construction BMPs, a significant proportion either do not have BMPs or not conducting necessary inspections. So going back to the permit, number 6 is just a notification and follow-up for BMP deficiencies. And it just requires that the permittee develop a program to notify BMP owners or operators when deficiencies are identified and conduct subsequent inspections to ensure that required repairs are completed. As far as the enforcement, if the deficiencies are not corrected in a timely manner, the permittee must enforce its correction orders and, if necessary, perform the required maintenance work. So looking at the data from 2022, the column chart that you see displays the number of BMPs requiring maintenance and the number of enforcement actions taken during the permit year across various MS4 population ranks. Interestingly enough, entities that inspected their BMPs more than 50% of the time required significantly less maintenance on average, so that's 5.13 versus 20.7. However, the average number of enforcement actions was slightly higher for those who inspected more frequently, which makes sense. So 5.2 versus 4.9. And I wasn't really satisfied by that because entities that inspect fewer BMPs might have artificially lower counts of maintenance and enforcement actions simply because they haven't identified all the issues that might be present. To address this, we normalized the counts by the number of BMPs inspections and performed a basic t-test to see if the differences between the groups were significant. The maintenance rate t-test shows a statistically significant difference between the two groups, indicating that the entities inspecting more than 50% of their BMPs have significantly lower maintenance rate compared to those inspecting less than 50%. However, this was not the case with enforcement actions, which had no significant difference. And those results just support the idea that more frequent inspections are associated with lower maintenance needs, but do not significantly affect the number of enforcement actions issued. So going back to the permit, number 7 just deals with the annual reporting requirements and just states that the permittee must summarize the following information in the annual report. So details on project reviews and BMP installations, details about maintenance inspections like the number of inspections, the number of enforcement actions taken, ordinance changes, and the thing we're going to talk about in more detail is training. As I mentioned at the conference last year, when it comes to staff training, KSA should be proud because it's the most commonly reported post-construction training used for MS4 staff. It was difficult to parse whether that training was referring to the conference session or the quarterlies. Both were mentioned, but most often it was just KSA. It'd be nice to have a little more detail on the content of the training. It's also worth noting that although The Kentucky Erosion Prevention Sediment Control course is great. It's probably not the most applicable training for MCM5. So going back to the permit, we'll hit both of these in tandem. So we have number 8 and number 9. 8 is just talking about the activity tracking for compliance, and 9 is just the stormwater quality management plan preparation guidance. So now that we reviewed the permit requirements, I would like to transition to discuss the most common types of BMPs that we see, with a particular focus on green infrastructure since that's the permit prioritization. Additionally, I also want to cover how a robust long-term maintenance agreement structure can improve post-construction programs, some of the barriers associated with long-term maintenance agreement implementation, and lessons from other programs that may be applicable. So the graph that you see shows the total number of BMPs and the listed MS4s by type. As you might expect, most MS4s have a preference for dry basins and water quality units. However, you do see some varied use of green infrastructure within the larger MS4s, but this is not ubiquitous, especially when you look at smaller MS4s. In fact, our review revealed a similar trend, with the most common types of BMPs being dry detention and water quality units, which are ubiquitous across the population groups. Building on our discussion of permit requirements and the emphasis on green infrastructure and water quality versus quantity, we observed different strategies among larger MS4s in managing stormwater. For example, our dialogue with some of the larger MS4s reveals a nuanced classification of BMPs that distinguishes between those designed solely for quantity management versus those designed for quality. For example, while older detention basins were primarily designed for flood control, newer installations now also address pollutant removal and water treatment standards. This distinction is critical as it impacts the frequency and rigor of the inspections being conducted, and also influences long-term maintenance agreements and compliance tracking. It's that transition that underscores the inherent challenges in retrofitting existing infrastructure to meet current permit standards. For instance, MS4s face significant logistical and legal hurdles when attempting to apply new maintenance standards retroactively to BMPs installed before the new permit standards were in place. All of this highlights the importance of tracking and the separation of your total BMPs from those that are MCM5 compliant, because while you report on the end report, you have to enforce, and also you can't maintain what you don't track. And you can see this reflected in SD1's practices. Thank you, Brooke, for sending this data. Only BMPs that are designed to meet specific water quality standards post-adoption of new regulations are routinely inspected and maintained under the MS4 requirements. So now that we've covered the state and the requirements of post-construction controls in Kentucky, I would like to discuss long-term maintenance agreements, and mainly the key structure of long-term maintenance agreements, including barriers and strategies to offset BMP operation and maintenance cost, and associated considerations and challenges. So long-term maintenance agreements play a crucial role in ensuring the continued functionality and performance of stormwater BMPs. While the duration of long-term maintenance agreements can vary depending on local regulations and specific project requirements, they are typically established to ensure the functionality of the BMP throughout its intended lifespan. Some agreements may be in effect for a set number of years, to 10 to 20. Others may be structured to remain in place in perpetuity, effectively binding the current and future property owners to the terms of the agreement. For example, a long-term maintenance agreement might require the property owner to perform and document specific maintenance tasks on a regular basis. Things like inspecting and cleaning out the inlets and outlets, removing sediment, and maintaining vegetation, with the goal being to establish a framework for ongoing maintenance that safeguards the investment of the stormwater infrastructure and protects water resources. Drawing from a 2013 study out of Yale University, we can categorize the structure of maintenance programs into 4 primary models, each with unique characteristics, responsibilities, and considerations. So let's start with Model 1, which is the agency-managed maintenance program. In this model, all the maintenance activities are handled by in-house staff, with the agency responsible for the GI program. This centralization allows for consistent maintenance standards and direct oversight of operations. And your team is especially trained in GI practices. And the biggest advantage here is the high level of accountability and quality control. However, it does require significant investments in staffing, training, and equipment, which can be challenging for smaller municipalities or rapidly growing green infrastructure networks. Moving on to Model 2, the contractor-based maintenance program. This is the most common approach where private contractors perform maintenance tasks under the supervision of the managing agency. Detailed contracts define the scope of work, performance expectations, and inspection protocols. This model offers flexibility by allowing the municipalities to hire contractors with specialized expertise. It also lightens the administrative load on municipal staff, letting them concentrate on the overall program management. But a key challenge of this is ensuring quality control. If contractors don't consistently meet standards, rigorous contract enforcement and inspections become essential. Next, we have Model 3, the Interagency Maintenance Program. Here, different municipal departments collaborate to handle maintenance. For example, a city's public works or park department might take on tasks under a formal agreement with the stormwater management agency. This model makes efficient use of existing municipal resources and promotes interdepartmental collaboration, integrating the maintenance into broader urban management activities like landscaping or road maintenance. On the downside, you can have conflicting priorities between departments and the potential need for additional training for staff, which can present some hurdles. Finally, there's Model 4, the Hybrid Maintenance Program. This model combines the elements of the previous three. Routine tasks such as mowing or debris removal are managed by city staff, while specialized services like permeable pavement vacuuming or bioswale inspections are outsourced to contractors. Where this flexible and scalable approach allows municipalities to allocate resources efficiently, especially in cities where you have a large inventory. However, the success of a hybrid model hinges on the effective coordination among all parties to avoid communication gaps and ensure that every maintenance activity meets established performance standards. Regardless of the model that you use, most programs suffer from the same general barriers related to the operation and maintenance of post-construction B&Ps. However, certain strategies to overcoming these barriers may be different based on the model that you use. But generally, these barriers fall into very distinct categories. So we have financial constraints, technical and expertise challenges, operational challenges, and institutional and regulatory gaps. Since funding is seemingly a challenge faced by most MS4s, I want to discuss 4 strategies to offset cost. So integrating GI into new or planned infrastructure projects, such as during road resurfacing or utility upgrades, allows for cost sharing and minimizes separate design or permitting fees. For example, Onondaga County's Save the Rain program in Syracuse incorporated GI as part of their annual street work. This approach yielded significant savings by ensuring the incremental costs for GI were only those beyond the already scheduled improvements. For strategy 2, achieve economies of scale, when projects are scaled up, whether it's like a series of green streets or multiple rain gardens, the cost per unit of GI tends to decrease. For example, in Philadelphia, research indicated that doubling the storage capacity of infiltration trench only raised costs by 14 to 27%. This principle shows that scaling can effectively reduce both construction and long-term maintenance cost. For strategy 3, utilizing innovative financing mechanisms, dedicated financing tools such as stormwater utilities can create a stable revenue stream. For instance, Rockville, Maryland, like many MS4s in Kentucky, have an ERU-based fee structure to ensure that the operation and maintenance costs of stormwater projects are covered continuously. Additionally, incentive programs that offer fee credits for private investments in GI help to further distribute the financial responsibility. Local expertise is a valuable asset. For example, Arlington County leverages its Parks Department knowledge on vegetation care, and Fairfax County runs an invasive management area volunteer program with local master naturalists. And in Olympia, Washington, even though the stormwater utility funds the maintenance, the work is carried out by the Parks Department. Such partnerships reduce costs by using existing human resources rather than hiring new specialized teams. The last thing I want to discuss is a novel way of incentivizing the use of green infrastructure and safeguarding investments. Anecdotally, it seems like most municipalities would be more eager to embrace GI if it wasn't for the plants. Specifically, the maintenance surrounding the plants or some assurances that if the vegetation fails, they're not out on their investment. The Yale study that I brought up earlier goes into details on warranties related to GI projects, which is not something we see a lot of in Kentucky, so that's why I want to discuss it. The majority of the GI programs in the study indicated as part of the construction contract for the agency-owned GI projects A warranty period begins when the construction is substantially complete. For most cities, this warranty period includes a contract obligation where the contractor is also responsible for the maintenance on the GI project for a certain amount of time. For the majority of the programs that included a warranty, the warranty and maintenance periods were identical and tended to have durations of 2 to 3 years. The primary goals of these warranties is to ensure that the newly installed infrastructure functions correctly, allowing defects to be identified and rectified during the earliest operational phase. Some key components of the warranty agreements include contractor responsibilities for initial maintenance and corrective actions, warranty coverage, so not just the vegetation, but also subsurface infrastructure, and then certain performance standards like inspection protocols and retainage clauses. Like everything, there are various challenges and considerations to think about, and these can include vegetation establishment, transition to long-term maintenance, and enforcement of warranty terms. Maybe this is something that can be implemented in the contracts or ordinances around here, probably a question for the other speakers, but that's my presentation. I do want to note that all the resources used in this presentations and others will be uploaded to the website, and I think at this point we may have some time for questions before I hand it over to Brett Clark to give an overview of some of the great work that Louisville MSD has been doing with their post-construction program.